Auto insurance can all seem the same until it comes time to use it. So don't get stuck paying more for less coverage. Switch to USAA Auto Insurance and you could start saving money in no time. Get a quote today. Restrictions apply.
USAA.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Dr. Psych Mom Show. Today, I'm going to talk about whether you're letting your social anxiety hurt your marriage. And this is going to be a good episode for you if you have ever just insisted you're an introvert, but then, actually you don't sound like a happy introvert. You're somebody who kind of doesn't really like anybody, and that's not exactly what's meant by an introvert, but you don't want to explore it too deeply. Well, this episode will help you explore it. And before that, please do subscribe. My most recent subscriber episode was Jealousy is Not All Bad. And so if you've ever had these discussions where you want your partner to be jealous of you because at least it's a sign that they give a shit, then it's the episode for you. And of course, 200 more episodes if you subscribe. More probably by now. Okay, so social anxiety disorder is where you are so scared of being embarrassed or humiliated that it stops you from engaging in normative ways like going to events, making friends, etc. And I'm actually going to bring up the DSM criteria for social anxiety right now. All right, so here we go. A marked and persistent fear of one or more social or performance situations in which the person is exposed to unfamiliar people or possible scrutiny by others. The individual fears that he or she will act in a way or show anxiety symptoms like blushing or trembling that will be humiliating or embarrassing, right? Exposure to the feared social situation almost invariably provokes anxiety. The person recognizes that the fear is excessive. The feared situations are avoided or else endured with intense anxiety or distress. And this avoidance or distress interferes significantly with the person's normal routine, occupational or academic functioning, social activities or relationships, etc. And this is not related to a substance or another disorder, like you're not trembling because of Parkinson's, you're trembling because of anxiety or what have you. All right, so those are the official criteria of social anxiety disorder. That is not the same as introversion. And it's not the same as being a homebody. And I have long seen in my practice people who say, I'm just an introvert, or I just don't like hanging out with other people, when what they really mean is I hate hanging out with other people because I'm terrified and I'm anxious, but I don't maybe even know the difference between those things of like not wanting to versus being anxious until, of course, I try to help people drill down into what's really going on. And social anxiety is an anxiety disorder. It's linked to other anxiety disorders, often comorbid with generalized anxiety, such as being worried about everything. You can Google those DSM criteria. The DSM is the book that we use to diagnose, right? So it has these certain criteria, these like bullet points. And if you hit enough of them, then you have the disorder, right? But anywho, so generalized anxiety, OCD, phobias, all these things are anxiety disorders. And so if you have one, you're likelier to have others, and they're genetically predisposed. If your parent has an anxiety disorder or your sibling, it's likelier that you will as well. Like everything, it's nature and nurture. And it's anxiety of any sort also overlaps with depression. So if you're depressed, then it's likelier that you could have an anxiety disorder, And when somebody has untreated social anxiety, and I'll get to how to treat it in a sec, but when somebody has untreated social anxiety, it can massively impact their parenting, being a good partner, their work performance, etc. And while most people can figure out the work part, unless the social anxiety is disabling, they could figure out how to have certain routines and certain, expected behaviors, like kind of a persona, a work self that they put on so that they can function at work. And often people, people kind of see them a little bit as anxious, but not in any sort of way that's really super noticeable or distracting. Even teachers, or doctors or people that are outward facing, they can have social anxiety, but they know how to be a good teacher or they know how to be a good doctor. So then they go into that persona, that script, and they kind of just act the same. And while they're more activated and physiologically aroused in a negative way, by these situations, it's not disabling and it doesn't really interfere with work performance that much. However, then in the evenings or the weekends when their guard is down, they need more time to recover because they were really, really stressed, by having to put on their work self, or if they're a stay-at-home mom, even like engaging with other moms or whatever. And then they can often become like hermits. And this is much to the chagrin of their spouse and their kids. So these are the people that say, oh, I'm an introvert, but the reality is when their kids want to bring over a friend or the idea of having another family come to the house, it doesn't just make them like irritated like it would if you're an introvert, like, oh, my whole night of just, sitting at home is going to be fucked. Oh, well, shit happens. It isn't that feeling. It's more of a fear. It's more that they start getting anxious. And the stomach starts to hurt or your back starts to hurt and your heart rate goes up because you're actually scared of the situation. You're scared of hosting other people because you think you'll do something embarrassing. You think that you won't interact in a normal way. You think that you won't be able to ask them to leave, for example, at any point. They'll just stay forever. Your whole night will be fucked and you won't really know what to say or do. And maybe you do these weird things that you don't even know about. And how does your house look compared to other houses? And will this in fact make it worse for your kid to host this friend over because your house somehow looks weird or you'll interact in a weird way? And then it'll be worse for your child because nobody will want to be their friend, or this other family that you want to have come over, or you want to go to their house. In some way you're going to do something or say something that makes you feel like you're going to embarrass yourself or embarrass your family. Or if you're a guy with social anxiety and your wife brings up going out to dinner with another couple, you're like, what the hell would I talk about? I don't have anything to talk about. I'm not interesting. How am I going to respond if they talk about something? What if we're not politically aligned? What if I say something that makes them not like me? What if somehow I, in my massive anxiety and weird behavior, sabotage my wife from having this continued relationship with this woman? And so then usually what the guy would do is say, why don't you just go out with her? I'm tired. I work all week. Why don't you just go out with her? I'm not going to like this guy anyway. So then she ends up thinking you're an asshole, right? Instead of you admitting that it makes you super anxious. And like all anxiety is more common in women than men. That does not mean that I don't see men with anxiety. Obviously, I do. And I have a lot of podcasts about that and posts about that because guys are less likely to admit it than women, or to even know really what it is. So like when a man feels that kind of heart rate increase, he may think, I'm irritated. I worked the whole week and then I'm expected to do this dumb social shit. Whereas a woman would be like, oh, my heart rate is accelerating. I'm anxious. I must be anxious about getting together with these people. And this doesn't, of course, only impact you and your marriage. It impacts your kids too, because your kids are watching you and they're learning that because kids are really smart and they can pick up on things, and they're understanding that you find social situations to be really stressful. And so therefore they're watching you, they're learning from you. You are their template of how to move in the world and navigate the world successfully. And if you think that something is really stressful, then they're going to think it's really stressful. And it's like that experiment I tell you guys about periodically where it's one of my favorites, where the baby is supposed to crawl to its mother over a clear glass floor that the baby can see through. And so and of course a baby doesn't know anything because it's a baby. And so the baby doesn't know if it's like going to die, like fall down, right? Because it's see-through. The floor is see-through. They see things going on underneath, like on a different floor. And so when the mother on the other side says, it's okay, come here, baby, crawl to me, baby, and she's clapping and smiling, the baby will just crawl. But if the mother looks anxious about the situation, then the baby will not and will start crying, right? And so it's a real world analog of what happens in anxious homes every day. So if a parent is looking forward to social engagement and is acting happy and acts like it's a fun thing, then the child thinks that interacting with other people and socializing is overall positive and a great part of your life and a way to enjoy yourself. But if every time people come over, it's like a fight between your parents and they're cleaning obsessively and anxious and kind of rehearsing almost how it's going to go and what's going to happen, then the child learns that interacting with other people is a source of anxiety and stress, and whatever genetic predisposition they already had toward anxiety from having your DNA is going to be amplified by this parenting, right? And so they're modeling on a socially anxious parent, which is obviously going to increase them having social anxiety, right? The chances. And so I promised you I would talk about how to treat this. Well, as I've discussed many times, the best treatment for all anxieties is exposure therapy. And the exposure therapies, by the way, if you go to a therapist and you're working on your social anxiety and you're doing exposure with response prevention, which is the full name of exposure therapy, exposure with response prevention. We have people at my practice that do this, and there's other people, obviously. This is a key way for people to work on anxiety, phobias, etc. You're preventing the response of escape or avoidance. So you're staying in the situation. Usually, if it was a fear situation, you would get out of it quickly, as you remember I said in the DSM criteria. But so, for example, the guy who's anxious would cancel the double date, or he would say, I don't want to do it, or he would leave early, But if you make yourself stay, then you understand that your anxiety will peak and decrease. People don't stay in a situation long enough when they're anxious to see that the anxiety always comes down. You just have to habituate to the stressor, and then the anxiety comes down. So if you are going to have people over and you make sure to somehow get them in and out within 45 minutes, because you're so anxious and you feel like you can only tolerate 45 minutes, well, then you didn't work on your anxiety at all. What you did was teach yourself that if it had gone on for 46 minutes, you would have had a panic attack and it would have been intolerable. No, what you have to do is stay in an endless social situation. You have to stay in a play date with no end point, right? And eventually, you know what happens if you stay in a play date with no end point and you're an anxious person? You just get bored. You get bored and you get annoyed and, but your heart rate isn't up. In fact, you're just fucking bored. You start to try to go on your phone. You start to fantasize about this kid leaving your house, but it don't matter because you're not anxious anymore. So you won. And so that's what anxiety exposures are. They're putting yourself in situations that are uncomfortable and then waiting out the anxiety. It will feel like it will never go away, but it will. So, for example, if you were that guy with social anxiety, you would go on the double date and you would talk. And you would see that even if you and that guy, the husband, don't hit it off, you're all right. Everything's fine. So what? It doesn't have to be a best friend. It was one night of your life. And on the other positive hand, you showed your wife that you loved her. You tried your hardest. You modeled to your kids that they have normal, healthy parents who go out with other couples sometimes. And overall, it was a win. And obviously, if you were raised to be that socially anxious, you probably saw it growing up. So then you could say, damn, I wish I would have seen my dad interact with other people instead of just sitting at home watching TV, because of what I realize now is his own social anxiety, that I just thought was misanthropy or, hating people. So point being, if you struggle with social anxiety, it limits your spouse. They can't do certain things. It limits your kids. They can't do certain things. And it transmits the same anxiety to your children. So it's a lot of reasons to work on it. And the way that you work on it overall is by working with a therapist to put yourself in, or on your own, to put yourself increasingly into situations where you confront the anxious stimulus and you do not escape until you're less anxious. So what we used to do I used to do a lot of this stuff. Right now, obviously, I work with more relationship issues, but, I used to do a lot of exposure with response prevention. It was a key part of my program. We were trained behaviorally at University of Maryland for my doctorate and on my internship and et cetera at the VA. And so this is also, by the way, for PTSD, you use exposure with response prevention, where the guys it was all guys that I had, they were talking about their combat experiences and they would get flashbacks, right? And so this is PTSD is a form of anxiety as well. And we would talk about the flashback, the memory in the flashback over and over and over. And at first they were super uncomfortable talking about it and they didn't even want to talk about it at all. It takes a lot of, closeness and trust to even open up. And then we would talk about it, the same story every session. We would do it for until you're 8. So you learn how to rate your anxiety from 0 to 10. They would be talking about it. They would be at a 10. But eventually if you keep repeating literally the same story that they would write out and they would read it over and over and over and over and over, and eventually they would get to where it was a 5. And when it's a 5, you can go to the next story when your anxiety goes down by half. And we have people at my practice that do this. If this is interesting to you for PTSD, for social anxiety. So for social anxiety, you would have to stay on the play date until your anxiety went down to a 5 out of 10 from a 10 out of 10, etc. And if this is interesting, it should obviously be something that you're working on. You could reach out to my practice, Best Life Behavioral Health. And this is exposure therapy with response prevention. And you can do it in vivo too. Not in my practice because we're all virtual, but if you have a fear of flying, there are therapists who will come with you and increasingly so it's incremental. So first you'll go to the airport. That's a 10 out of 10 for a lot of people. Then you sit in the airport in the lounge till you get to a 5. Then you book a ticket. That's something. And then eventually there are actually people that will get on a little plane with you. That's pretty cool. It's a lot of commitment as a therapist if they'll get on a damn flight with you. Those people must not have children. They must have open schedules because the amount of time, to do that. No, I'm just kidding. But I'm not really kidding, but it's, there's also therapists, by the way, who will be with you in the car if you have driving phobia, who will go over bridges with you and you drive back and forth over the bridge until your anxiety goes down by half. But anyway, so a little sidebar about different phobias and PTSD and what exposure can be used for. But back to the topic at hand, it can be used for social anxiety. So get yourself into those situations. Stop teaching your kids and your spouse that we can only do certain things and it's because I'm an introvert. No, it's not. Introverts can do other shit. They just don't like to. When you're scared, that's not introvert anymore. You could be an introvert separately, but you have social anxiety. And any anxiety really constricts a relationship. It constricts a family. I have a lot of stuff on what it was like to be raised in an anxious home, my own experience and that of clients. I discuss this all the time. Your kid does not deserve to feel like the world is a dangerous place, like people are dangerous, like anything is dangerous. Everything should seem open and possible. That's the goal of healthy parenting, to show your child that the world is a positive, interesting, and exciting place full of opportunity. And if you're not showing that in this domain, work with somebody, figure it out. Social anxiety, like all anxiety, is extremely responsive to therapy when it's the right therapy. Just sitting there talking about your social anxiety 45 minutes a week while somebody nods and says that sounds really hard, save your money. But if you can really target and work on this, then you could really transform your life and that of your family. All right, thank y'all for listening, and I'll talk to you soon. Have a great day, guys.